to hear your thoughts during this morning. I also would like to recognize the presence of our president, the president of FAAP, Dr. Bias Guillaume, who is here to honor this event as well, and his daughter, Pilar, who is also here, Professor Massaro, our academic director, and all the friends, professors who are attending the event as well. I would first, before giving you the floor, Your Highness, I would like to thank a lot, especially the Embassy of Malaysia, of Brazil in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, who is watching us live right now, directly from Malaysia, on behalf of the Ambassador Ari Quintanilla. So, Ambassador Ari Quintanilla from Malaysia, thank you very much for making this possible. We are very grateful on behalf of FAAP. We thank you very much. So, I have here a very long, it's not a short bio, it's a very long bio, because as you can imagine, His Highness has a lot of experience to share with us, and he's being able to change positions and contribute for different areas of knowledge. He is not just a person from the royal family, but also someone who maintains passion for the arts. He is the founding president of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS. IDEAS is a think tank that is seeking to promote public policy solutions based on the principles of rule of law, liberty, and justice. His Highness is also the Pro-Chancellor for UCSI University. He is the trustee of Jeffrey Chia Foundation, president of Icahn College, Royal Fellow at the National University of Malaysia, Associate Fellow at University Technology Mara, and Chairman of Accelerate Malaysia, a leading school for digital skills. I could go very further. He has a very long curriculum, and I can imagine that we are very lucky to have a chance to learn from him during this morning. So I would like to remind you the importance of Malaysia. Malaysia is a country that has a strategic location in the world. It is in a very important position in Southeast Asia. It's a hub for trade, for commerce, connects the East and West. We have a country which is facing economic stability. We have a very robust financial sector in Malaysia. And of course, we have lots to say about cultural diversity and also natural resources. So we have much in common between Brazil and Malaysia, and that's a good opportunity to think about the role of Asia in the world we are facing, since we all know that the future belongs to Asia. We are all going to testify the changing of the East to the West to the East, and Malaysia is a very strategic country in this process, and also a very good case in comparison to Brazil. So I don't want to go further, because of course everybody here wants to hear from you, but just a few words to say that we are very happy and really, really honored with your presence, sir. So we're your presence, sir. So thank you so much, and the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. Obrigado, Professor Minhota, and bom dia. That is all my Portuguese. Thank you to the President for FAAP for being here. It's a real honor to be here. This is my first time in Sao Paulo, and Sao Paulo is the last of my cities in Brazil before I go back to Malaysia. So I was in Rio de Janeiro, and I saw some of the Carnival, and then which is very, very interesting for the cultural diplomacy. And then I was in Belo Horizonte, and I went to Ouro Preto, and I went to Brasilia. So all very, very different cities, and very, very interesting for me as a Malaysian to come to Brazil for the first time. And as Professor Minhota was saying, the similarities between Malaysia and Brazil are much more, and the relationship is much closer than people, I think, realize. The trade is very, relatively significant. We import $4 billion US dollars, and we export $1 billion US dollars annually to Brazil, and this is petroleum, iron ore, and recently your President Lula invited Prime Minister Anwar of Malaysia to Brazil later this year before the G20 summit, and one of the issues on the agenda is semiconductors to increase the imports. And so there is a growing economic relationship. Brazil is the biggest producer of halal meat. So halal is the meat slaughtered for Muslim consumption, and we import a lot of it already. And there is going to be growth there. There is cooperation on the environmental sustainability because you have the Amazon, and in Malaysia we have a lot of rainforests as well. So COP30 is happening up in Belem next year. So this is something that is going to be of great interest to Malaysia. And of course, in the geopolitics, there's a lot about US and China, but in the current moment, President Lula has been talking a lot about Palestine, and this is an issue which is very important to Malaysians, and Malaysians can see that Brazil, South Africa and Brazil and other countries are making strong representations in the international community, and this is, this is appreciated by Malaysia. So all of these things are going on, but if I may turn maybe a little bit to history and explain sort of the development of my country and how it is that we are now, and why there are maybe some other similarities between Malaysia and Brazil which are quite interesting. So 1500, the Portuguese came to Brazil, I understand, and 11 years later, the Portuguese were in Malacca. So Malacca was at that time the main entity in the Malay Peninsula, the Sultanate of Malacca, and that was a very important trading area. Tomé Pires, the Portuguese diplomat, said, "Whoever has his hands on Malacca has his throat on Venice." So this is the importance of Malacca to international trade, even at that time, in the 16th century. And this is why the Portuguese were interested and came to Malacca and invaded. And this is the beginning of colonialism in what is now Malaysia. And so we have that link right from the beginning, right? This shared colonial heritage. And because of that, I know some Portuguese words, because queijo and manteiga and bandera and garfo are all Malay words that we took from the Portuguese. So now I can order cheese and butter in Brazil, which is very good.
Yeah, I must say you are safe. It's the best words you could learn.
Okay, great. Happy to hear that. And it has been very useful and a nice way to connect, right? So we have to make the most of this colonial heritage. But so this colonial history began, and of course the importance of the region continued. The Dutch came and became the next colonial power, and eventually the British came. And what the British did was they took Malacca and founded Penang and Singapore as well. But they also signed these treaty relations with the other sultanates at the time. So in the peninsula, you have these kingdoms ruled by a sultan or a king, and the British signed these treaties whereby the British would become the administrators, even though they would retain the sultans. So if you know British colonialism in India, they did the same thing. They have these treaties with the Rajas and the Maharajas, and so they become basically the colonial power, and they control the economy and they control foreign relations and so on. And of course, why do you have these colonies? It's to enrich the colonial center. So Malaya, so collectively, all of these entities became known as Malaya. And what the British did was to improve the economic output to make the British Empire rich. And the most important commodity from the 19th century was rubber. Thank you, Brazil, because the British took the rubber from the Amazon and brought it to Malaya, and we became the #1 producer of rubber, and we also became the #1 producer of tin. And so this sort of set up the colonial economy, and of course into the 20th century you have the war, you have World War II, and of course in our part of the world, Japan was the enemy of the British Empire. Japan was allied to Germany, Nazi Germany, and of course the Japanese came and kicked out the British, and then you had the bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that ended the war. The British came back, and so we then, Malaya got independence from the British in 1957, and it was a process of negotiation. Unlike some other countries, so in Indonesia, for example, there was a long, bloody war between the Indonesians and the Dutch for independence. But in Malaya, it was different. It was more negotiation between the local political elites with the British. And this happened in 1957. And we maintained a good relationship with Britain and the Commonwealth. We had at the time, if you know, at the time there was a big period of communist violence in Vietnam. Everyone knows about Vietnam, but also there was a communist insurgency in Malaya, and it was us with the British and the Commonwealth to maintain the security and to fight the communists. So in a way, it was aligned that we got independence in this way, but also remained friendly with the British after that. And so with independence, we inherited that colonial economy, so rubber and tin were very important, but we also inherited a lot of the institutions that that was typical of the British. So we have a parliamentary democracy, so we have 2 chambers in the upper house. We have the Senate, which represents the states. So back in 1957, there were 11 states, and now after 1963, there were 14 states, and then in 1965, 13 states, because Singapore became a state of Malaysia in 1963, but 2 years later, Singapore was asked to leave or expelled from Malaysia, and then Singapore became independent. So we have the upper house, which represents the states, and then we have the lower house, which is elected for each constituency. I think this is the same in Brazil. And each state has also its own legislature, and each state has its chief minister. And I think this is the same in Brazil as well. But what we have, which you don't have, is the royal institution. So earlier I mentioned from the colonial times that the kingdoms were there, each with their king, and that has maintained until today. So 9 out of the 13 states still have the royal family, and within each state they are the constitutional head of state, and then they also have the chief minister and the legislative assembly. But at the federal level, you have the federal king, which is elected from the 9 of state rulers, and every 5 years there is an election to rotate the head of state for the federal level. So this is a unique institution in Malaysia, and it's an institution that has had different roles in the past, but has a very important role today because of the increase in the political competition. So I mentioned in 1957, Malaya got the independence. And since 1957, all the way until 2018, the same political party, the same coalition has been in power. And this is the coalition that basically, was responsible for the development of the country in terms of the economics and in terms of the infrastructure and development. So what happened in the 60s and 70s is that you had a slow shift in the economy, maintaining the commodities, but also moving towards industrialization. And the high point of this industrialization was in the 1980s, when you had the Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir, at the time, who aggressively pursued, automobile sector, moving towards, beginning to build, the foundations of the semiconductors, so moving into manufacturing of components, electrical components, and so on. Then later on, a move towards the services sector. So Islamic finance now is quite big in Malaysia. And I should say, at the same time, there is a shift in the political concentration of power because of this one-party dominance from 1957 to 2018. Because what happens when you are in power and you keep winning elections and you have 2/3 majority in the parliament, it means that some of the check and balance institutions become less prominent. So our judiciary, for example, was actually weakened. There were a couple of occasions where the political leadership fought with the judiciary. There was some also weakening of the media. So we have, supposed to have an independent and free media situation, but the government took more and more control over the media, and including some conflict also between the government and the royal institution, because in Malaysia, the constitution says that the kings are supposed to have some powers, but again, because of this political consolidation of power with all these elections, the politicians were able to sort of weaken the checks and balances, and even the parliament became more of a rubber stamp. Parliament was not really fighting with the executive, and also even the federal structure, because in theory, the states have the competencies and the federal government has the competencies, but essentially everyone is the same party. So the power gets concentrated and all the decision-making power becomes more and more not only in the executive, but in one person, which is the Prime Minister. Now, one thing that happened over time is that there was stronger links between I mentioned earlier, the big push towards industrialization, the creation of a new middle class, but also this importance of this relationship between the politicians and the capitalists. So a lot of the new business leaders, a lot of the, if you wanted to get all these contracts and projects to build the highways, to build the airports, to build the ports, to be big in sugar or in other areas of industry, you needed to have this relationship with the political elite. And so this became many opportunities for crony capitalism and ultimately corruption. So why in 2018 did this coalition that was in leadership since 1957, why was it defeated in the general election? It was defeated in the general election because the Prime Minister at the time sort of took all of this, patronage and power and influence over the economy to a new level, in which there was supposed to be this sovereign wealth fund called 1MDB, which was supposed to channel funds towards big infrastructure projects to develop the Malaysian economy. But in the end, it was perceived to be a vehicle to enrich certain individuals. A lot of the money, which was loans actually from other entities, from other countries, disappeared. And this cost billions of US dollars lost from the Malaysian economy. And this led to a huge outpouring of protests. You had protests in the streets, and you had also a lot of very long, I can talk about some of the personalities involved, but essentially the former Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir, who was responsible in the 80s and 90s for the big industrialization, went against the Prime Minister of that time in 2018, Najib, who was associated with this 1MDB issue. And that is why the government fell, and you had a new political party in its place. Now, since then, you've had increased political competition, which has made civil society very important in Malaysia. So in the time with all this political concentration occurred, there were no independent think tanks. There were not many NGOs that were active in the Malaysian democratic space. But beginning in the 2000s, some of that space opened up, and that gave the opportunity for institutions like mine, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS, to be able to be established. And now, because of that increased political competition, the role of civil society in Malaysia has become very much stronger and, I would say, permanent. It is now no longer possible to ignore the contribution of think tanks and civil society organizations. And one very important reform that has happened since 2018 is the Parliament has had these new committees. So before this, in our Parliament, there were no committees, and you would just have the chamber, and you would vote once in a while. If you were an MP, you just come and you vote according to your party. Now, we've expanded the committee system, so the process of policy making has become a lot more comprehensive. So MPs have a bigger role to play to formulate the legislation, and also civil society is a part of this process. So to give you an example, in one of the committees is on political finance reform, and IDEAS is the secretariat for this committee. So we actually talk to MPs from across all of the different parties, opposition and the government, to talk about why it's important to have political finance reform. So more transparency in the donations, more transparency in the contributions, and also to put limits on what individuals and companies can donate to candidates and parties. So that's just one example. There's another parliamentary group on refugee policy. So this is an area where there's not much interest before, but now you have MPs who are really interested and have really sort of taken ownership of refugee policy. So these are just one or two of the examples of the institutional reforms that IDEAS is a part of. I think that's one more area before I finish my introduction to Malaysia, is that Malaysia is a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multi-religious society. I mentioned earlier the Sultanate of Malacca in 1511 that the Portuguese were interested in. That was already a cosmopolitan, very important city for trade. And we've always been open to different people coming in from around the world. But what the British did under their policy was to deliberately invite many people to settle into the country. So the Chinese were invited to work, especially in the tin mines, and Indians were invited to work in the plantations, and so especially the rubber. And so you had this influx, this migration, economic migration of people from China and India. And so now in Malaysia, you have the three main racial groups: Malays, the Muslims, Malays, who are 65-70% of the population, the ethnic Chinese, 15 to 20% of the population maybe, and then the ethnic Indians, another 7 to 10%, and then the indigenous population, especially in the east of Malaysia, in the Sabah and Sarawak, the two states on the east of Malaysia, the indigenous population is very significant as well. And this ethnic diversity has always been a feature of our politics. Even at independence, the way that the British, when the British gave the independence to Malaya, it was to a multiracial coalition, a Malay party, a Chinese party, and an Indian party. And sort of these coalition has maintained the peace and the stability and the sort of the unity amongst the different groups in Malaysia. And especially during the time of the huge economic growth in the 80s and 90s, when we had 7-8% GDP growth every year, there was this great sense of Malaysian unity, of optimism. The future will be bright, and there was this policy of Vision 2020, so that by the year 2020, Malaysia would be a fully developed nation. And this was sort of enabled by the growth and the unity amongst the groups. But in recent times, when there has been a slowed economic situation, some of the politicians have tried to use these divisions and these differences to create a narrative of conflict. So indeed, in 1969, the country did have some ethnic issues. There was some violence, and that's why the policy, especially in the economic sphere, shifted to one of promoting much more Malay growth. So a lot of these new capitalists that I mentioned earlier, a lot of them came from it was a deliberate strategy to enrich the Malay population, because the Chinese population were already dominant in the economy before that. But as I say, now there is the situation where maybe some politicians, including the same politicians before who were talking about unity and togetherness, change their minds. When it's tough, it's much easier to play the blame game. And you see this populism all around the world. I think you see it in the United States, you see it in Europe, and dare I say, I think you see it in Brazil, where there is difficulty in the country. It's much easier to sort of blame certain communities, and so we have the same phenomenon here in Malaysia. So the challenge now of Malaysia for civil society is to make sure that the institutions are strong, so that we don't have this ethnic populism which leads to violence, which leads to division. We want to maintain the unity amongst the different communities. We want to make sure that there is stability for economic growth. We want to make sure that the judiciary remains independent, and we want to make sure that policy making is something that can have a wide participation from civil society and for academics. And I want to finish by coming back to the royal institution, because back for centuries, even before the Portuguese arrived, the rulers played the role of being the heads of Islam. And so now, where you have the situation where some people are talking about division between the Muslims and the non-Muslims, and and also talking about dominance of one group, and also talking about changing the institutions, it's very important to have this royal institution to be able to say and to remind everyone that we have our federal constitution, our setup. This was agreed to by everyone in 1957 and again in 1963. And so this is an interesting situation in Malaysia now, where you have heavy political competition, you have an active civil society, and you have the monarchs, the royal institution, also playing a role to ensure stability and moderation in the country. And this is interesting because I think in Brazil, you've had these questions as well of the supremacy of your federal constitution, the competencies between the state and the federation. So I'm very, very happy to have a conversation with you and understand more about what we can do together. Thank you so much.
Sir, this was an amazing introduction. I was taking notes here, and at some point, I was thinking about how Brazil and Malaysia have things in common, as you said. You mentioned, for example, the challenge to move from an agricultural economy oriented to industrialization. Then you mentioned how important it is to defend and to promote democracy and democratic institutions. You said important words about national unity and fighting against division, polarization, and now you finished talking about transparency and fight against populism, something that we all in Brazil are facing at the same time as you in Malaysia. So I thank you so much for this very precious overview you could give us. And I would like to start the conversation maybe addressing some questions. And if you, sir, agree, maybe we could open the floor for the students later and they can share ideas and ask questions as well. They are very anxious, I must say, to address you questions. For our audience here in person, you can address your questions both in Portuguese or in English. If you do in Portuguese, we will be very happy to translate to His Highness your question, okay? So I would like to start, since we had this introduction about how Malaysia works, organized its institutions, and developed its economy during the last decades. Now thinking a little bit more about international affairs. I know you've been not just an intellectual, but someone very influential, writing and, you know, producing lots of papers about many issues I would like to know about. And my first question, since Brazil and Malaysia are so similar, is how Malaysia balance, you know, its international affairs and economic interests between major global powers like China, the US, and European Union. And I ask that because since we have so many things in common, this is now the major challenge for Brazil. Brazil, as an emerging country, as a BRICS partner, is always trying to diversify the alliances. So we try to manage to be good friends to the US and the European Union, the West in general. At the same time, we still have a good partnership in Asia with China, for example. And this has been very difficult for us to maintain this balance. And I know you have a good experience doing that. So please, could you share with us how you design, you organize your strategy in international affairs for this specific challenge?
Well, absolutely. At independence, we were very much, as I said, very British-oriented, and close relations with the Commonwealth. And we didn't, because we had the communist insurgency, we were not friendly with the communist countries, especially PRC. And so, but that has changed. So, beginning in the 70s, we established diplomatic relations with China, and now, of course, China is the most important trading partner of Malaysia, the #1 trading partner. So we are a small country, but again, there's a nice link to history, because Malacca was prosperous because it was an open trading economy, and we have no choice but to be the same now. So China will always be, in the foreseeable future, remain the most important trading partner, and then ASEAN, the ASEAN region, and the United States remains #3. And this is just a reality. We will, for economic reasons, we will have to maintain good relations with everyone. Of course, there are some security questions, because China has a big interest in the South China Sea. So it's important for Malaysia to work with other partners to maintain freedom of navigation, for example, in the waters. And so, yeah, we have some American and, sorry, I can't say American in Brazil, US, ships and British, ships and, to come. So we maintain a defense agreement with the UK and Singapore and New Zealand and Australia as well. So this is just some examples of how, we have to be friends with everyone. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Belt and Road Initiative, this we are part of that. We engage with that. So we are active in different multilateral initiatives to maintain that.
That's a great answer. And of course, I have plenty of questions here. If you let me free, I can ask thousands of questions to His Highness. But I want to give you the opportunity to also make your questions. So please, I would like to ask you to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Please introduce yourself, your name, your original undergrad course, and then please your question. I ask you to be very brief in the questions so we can accommodate the most we can, okay? Please, if you can stand.
Good morning, Your Highness. I'm Luis from the International Relations majors, and I have a question for you about the China and Taiwan possible conflict in the foreseeable future. How would that impact the economic and the political relations of Malaysia with the remaining countries in Asia if the conflict would escalate or anything similar to that? Thank you.
Just easy questions, you see, Your Highness.
Well, look, no one wants it to happen, and I don't think it will happen. I think both sides know the devastating, truly devastating consequences of that on the people. But let's answer your question. I mean, if it happens, yes, it would be deeply, deeply disruptive. I mean, my think tank, again, we at Ideas, we also, try to maintain the balance. We do a lot of work with Taiwan on CPTPP, right? So trying to promote, look at the impact, how to develop more trade between Malaysia and Taiwan. But also, of course, we maintain good relations with PRC. So I think it would be, I cannot imagine, again, I think realpolitik will rule the day. If there were to be a conflict, Malaysia would do its best to stay out of it, but ultimately the PRC is a much more significant power to take into consideration. But I think the chance of actual, real, full-out physical war is not, it's not a big probability in the next 5-10 years. I hope. Sorry.
Yeah, we all do. Okay, so next question. Do we have anyone else who wants to address a question? Don't be shy. Okay, we have here someone. Please introduce yourself and address your question. Remembering you can do that both in Portuguese or in English as you feel comfortable.
We'll speak in English. Hi, my name is João Lucas. I'm from Relations International. Sorry, because I'm a little shy.
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you, Fernanda. And I want to question you about, first of all, welcome to Brazil. And I want to question you what the relationship between Brazil and Malaysia helped, not only with financial and this kind of things, but with the culture, because we know like Malaysia have a lot of things to teach us by the culture, and Brazil too. Between Brazil and Malaysian relation Brazil. Thank you so much, My Highness.
Thank you.
That's a very good question about cultural diplomacy.
Yes. One of the first music that I remember growing up is Brazilian. So my father...
Which one?
I will tell you. Okay. So my father plays...
I'm very anxious.
My father plays guitar. And his favorite composer is Antonio Carlos Jobim. So, growing up, I would always hear my father play guitar. Garota da Ipanema, Desafinado, all of this, Corcovado. And so, when I came to Brazil, I was in Rio, and I was very excited because the airport in Rio is the Tom Jobim airport. But sadly, I heard no Jobim. But I heard a lot of samba. I went to the Samba Dromo in Rio. I saw the samba. It was great. So I think there's definitely room to expand the cultural diplomacy in the music. And I saw just now your beautiful art gallery, and I think we can do a lot. Especially, I mean, modern art is one thing, but I think there is a lot of exchange possible with the indigenous art, because we have our indigenous communities, and you have your communities in the Amazon. I'm sure there's plenty. I was in Rio yesterday. We went to the CCBB, the Cultural Center, and there was a very good exhibition of, again, the Amazon communities. And I thought there's a lot we can do with our Orang Asli communities as well, and do exchange. So certainly in terms of the music, but you know, and even in terms of the samba, although I have to say some of the things I saw in the Bloco will not work in Malaysia. so there is maybe some adjustment.
Yeah, which is your favorite music from Tom Jobim? Do you have a favorite one?
The favorite song? I mean, Garota de Ipanema is obviously the biggest. But I also like Ari Barroso, and I like Villa Lobos. So I'm a big classical music person. So, yes. Yeah.
We want you to feel very welcome.
Thank you. Yeah.
So very good. So do we have another question from the audience? Yes, please.
So, hi, good morning. My name is Mariana. I'm from the same class as the other two students here. And I'm very nervous, actually, so I'm sorry if I said something wrong. But I would like to ask you, as an Asian country, how do you see the transition government that I'm saying like we just haven't passed it to, but we are having, and how the Asia side see the President Lula and all the things that are happening in this delicate moment. But actually, I just asked about like the economic project and how we are coming back to the diplomatic world after like some past years. That's it. Thank you.
I mean, I'm hesitant to comment on another country's political situation, but the view from, you know, the little that we know, the view is that you had some years of, you know, this populist rhetoric, and maybe a challenge to some of your institutions, right? And I think, as I said earlier in my speech, this is a phenomenon that is everywhere in the world. Maybe this is a very simplistic perspective, right? I'm sure it's more complicated than that. I'm sure there are many reasons why people support one person or the other person. But what I can see is that in your current president, there has been a renewed interest in the environmental agenda. And this is, you know, as I said, this is of interest to us in Malaysia because we have our rainforests. And I think there is an interest, or there is a belief that now the separation of powers and the checks and balances will be more observed. I don't know if this is true. This is just the perspective that we have. But I think, you know, every country has to work with the government in another country. And I can observe that President Lula and Prime Minister Anwar have a good relationship, which is why, you know, it is a privilege for a non-G20 country to be invited to, you know, have a visit and to be included in the agenda. So would that have happened if you had a different president? I don't know.
Your Highness, you just mentioned G20. Brazil is in the presidency, as everybody knows, this year. And next year will be also a very important year for us, since we're hosting also COP30 in Belém do Pará, and also the BRICS summit. here in our country. And for you, I know 2025 is also a very important country because you're going to be chair at the Asian, yeah? So I would like to know the role that Malaysia plays in regional organizations such as Asian, if you could mention, and what about the priorities for this chair during the next year? I think it would be good to hear from you.
I mean, I can't speak for my government, but I will say that it is a big opportunity to be chair of ASEAN. And there's a lot we can do, but I think ASEAN as a regional entity has some limitations, right? Automatically people will make comparisons to the European Union. But ASEAN is more challenging because we have very different modes of government, right? We have parliamentary democracy, we still have a socialist one-party state, we have an absolute monarchy, we have a presidential republic. And so it is more difficult sometimes to have this consensus among ASEAN. And I think even within ASEAN there are different attitudes about how to interact with China. And of course we have this big problem of a genocide. Can I say that? Yeah. In Myanmar, right? The Rohingya people have been persecuted, and we have this issue of refugees that arise out of it, and it's difficult to find a common policy. How do you deal with that? ASEAN is not a body that sends in peacekeepers, right? I think they do that in some of the other regional institutions. They don't do that in ASEAN. So although it's an opportunity, there are some challenges. I would think that the focus will again be on the easier issues. How to have more economic integration, how to have better movement of people, how to have better environmental protections. I think these are the areas where ASEAN can do something. And as chair, I think Malaysia will pursue these things.
We have a hand raised right there. So please.
Your Highness, it is a pleasure to be in your presence today. My name is João Pedro. I'm studying international relations. And I would like to ask you about the colonial past in Malaysia. How Malaysia deals with this period of its history as something bad that brought repression and this kind of thing, or as something that changed the country and brought development and constructed the political and the economical sectors of your country. Thank you.
I mean, it's a complicated relationship. I mentioned earlier that after we had independence, we still were friends with the British and active in the Commonwealth because we were fighting the communists. So a lot of the soldiers were still there. And I mentioned that we still have this defense arrangement with the British and in New Zealand and Australia and Singapore. So this Commonwealth thing remains important. But in terms of the narrative, yes, there has been a shift towards looking at the colonial period with some disdain and disgust. Oh, the evil, imperialists. And I think this narrative has arisen because I think it's motivated by politics today, right? The desire to establish this, this new nationalism. We are independent, and that period was bad, and they exploited us. I mean, it's very complicated because you can say that a lot of our institutions inherited, were there. Our parliamentary democracy is definitely influenced by the British. Our common law system, our judiciary still refers back to British precedent. And so these things embed the British legacy. And when at the very beginning, I mentioned the words. Some of our vocabulary comes from the British and the Dutch and the Portuguese. So I think it's a complicated relationship. I think most people are relaxed about it, and the UK remains still the preferred destination for education. You can tell from my accent. I spent 11 years in the UK, right? And a lot of Malaysians want to go to university in the UK or also in Australia. So this is this is the reality. I think there will be a continued debate about how it is that we should maintain these links and maintain the institutions. Certainly there are people in Malaysia who argue that we should abandon all of it and we should become much more. So in the 60s, you know, during the communists, the argument was we don't need this British stuff and we should become a communist state, right? That was the argument of the communists. Now, the argument is much more on the conservative Muslims. Some who will say, you know, the constitution is secular, but we must move towards more Islamic institutions and more Sharia law and hudud. So this is the debate that is happening right now. And it's an interesting time because if you look in the Middle East, in some countries it's going the other way, right? They're saying we should have different views and there are reforms happening. Again, so this is a debate that will be happening in Malaysia for the next 10 years or more.
And this very good answer creates an opportunity for me to also tell you that besides everything I said in the introduction, His Highness was also educated at the Kuala Lumpur Ellis Smith School, but then he studied in the London School of Economics and Political Science, where he obtained a master's degree in comparative politics. Our professor of comparative politics here at FAAP is here right in front of me. Then His Highness worked at the UK Houses of Parliament, the World Bank, United Nations Development Programme, KRA Group, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And since we talked about Tom Jobim, it's very good for you to know that he's a pianist as well. So I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. So one here, we have another one there, please.
Greetings, Your Highness. At first, we saw the Africa Summit in Addis Ababa and the recent declarations of President Lula, and new discussion has risen about the role of the global South in the geopolitical world. What do you think about the position of leadership that the BRICS want to assume at this?
Could you mind telling us about your original
Oh, sorry. I am João Pedro and I'm on the international relations major also.
Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Oh, you're great.
I think, you know, we in Malaysia look at BRICS with a lot of interest because, you know, I think like most other small countries, we want to see a reform of the global institutions, you know, like United Nations. So we're very keen to see how BRICS will impact that. But I think in general, you know, cooperation amongst the global South is something that should be deepened and expanded. And yeah, I think there's not much specific I can say. I think, if anything, the next 2 years are very important with Brazil taking this leadership role and the relationship between Malaysia and Brazil deepening. And also with the chairmanship of ASEAN that Malaysia will have. So I don't have the good answer, I'm afraid, except that we look at it with interest and we want to expand it.
That's great. So,
good morning, Your Highness. It's an honor to have you here today. I'm Valentina from the International Relations course, and I would like to ask you, does Your Highness think about the upcoming US elections and its impact on Malaysia? Thank you.
US elections, another very, very simple subject.
I think I can't comment. I don't have enough insight into how the debates that you're having. I refer back to the earlier answer that I gave. Right, I think Malaysia, we need to always work with whoever is in government. I I will say that the agenda of environmental cooperation, of increased trade, and of cooperation in the geopolitical arena, especially in the Middle East now, is important. And whatever happens in your elections, I hope that those things will remain important. That's my answer.
Yeah, Your Highness, I would like just to use this final minutes to make sure that everybody is aware about the position of Malaysia on the two most important conflicts that we are facing right now around the world. So if you could just make this more clear for maybe people that don't know, what is the position of Malaysia about what's happening in Ukraine and the war against Russia, and in the relationship between Israel and Gaza, so the official position. And then I have my final question. I promise it's not as hard as this one.
Thank you. Ukraine. Honestly, Malaysia's position in Ukraine has been as quite disinterested in a way. I mean, we signed in the UN, we voted the right way, of course, but we're not very vocal about it. We will say, yes, we support territorial integrity, but are we doing so much to support? I mean, Malaysia is very far away. We're not involved in sending weapons, at least not publicly, as far as I know. So there's not the support for Ukraine is not huge. And I have to say, in the population, there is, I mentioned, this increased sort of maybe anti-American, anti-imperialist rhetoric. And so, I mean, if you go on social media in Malaysia and you look at the Ukraine, opinions, some Malaysians are actually saying that they support Russia because Russia is going against the US. So this is a mood that is there. With Palestine, it's very different. With Palestine, Malaysia has always supported, the Palestinians, the Palestinian cause, and I think this is both for religious reasons, because Malaysia is a Muslim majority country, but also for secular reasons. A lot of non-Muslim, non-Malay Malaysians are also very, very supportive of the Palestinian cause. And it reflects quite strongly. I mean, in the mosques in Malaysia, you will find the special prayers for the victims in Gaza. There is a boycott now. Many companies that are perceived to be supporting Israel, it's completely empty. If you go to McDonald's or Starbucks in Malaysia, completely empty. And of course, you can have an argument, is it logical? Who are you? Because, these people are employing Malaysians, and the relationship between the franchise, all of these things are questions that can be had. But I think the point of the question is, yes, Malaysia supports Palestine overwhelmingly, and will show that in their, economic activity as well.
So just to end our conversation, very productive conversation during this morning, I would like to ask you a question about Brazil. You've been traveling a lot, experiencing Brazil in different regions, trying and tasting Brazil by different experiences. And I would like to hear from someone that is coming here and exploring our country. What do you see in terms of opportunities for Brazil? When you look at the Brazilian situation right now, what do you see? What do you would expect for the Brazilian future? What maybe advice you could give us as some areas or subjects that we could pay attention to?
There's huge, everywhere I go, I see such huge opportunity. And, one of the facts that I mentioned that shocks a lot of Brazilians is when I talk about our growth rates in the 80s and 90s, because it's like 7-8%. And for you guys, that is never happened, right? You've had like 1% growth is a good thing for you. And I think this is very tragic, because I think there is so much that can be done. And in terms of the development of your economy and development of your institutions. And I think I'm very happy that you have this leadership role now with the G20 and BRICS and COP 30 that will enable you, I think, to leverage what you have. And I just I wish Brazil all the very best in doing that. I haven't mentioned, one of the things where I'm here I'm here to talk to you as with my think tank ideas, but I'm also here representing a university in Malaysia. And I think this is where I see a lot of the opportunity, because we see, of course, we're here at FAAP, which is very prestigious, and we're happy to be here, but we also have meetings in other institutions, and everywhere we see an interest to collaborate in the art space, in engineering, in medicine, and so in architecture. And so this is, I think, developing these links between academic institutions, and also hopefully to bring people as well. I'd love to have some of you students to come and experience Malaysia. And this, I think, in the world today, it's so important, to fight this division and to fight this insular thinking, but actually having people travel and experience the culture, experience the people, interact, understand each other. And I think if you do that, I think naturally the opportunities will come.
Yeah, that's what we call people-to-people diplomacy. We do believe in that, and that's why we have here at FAAP a very strong, huge, and important international office that works exactly in this specific field. You're going to be able to later meet our director, who is here. I would like to recognize Ms. Lourdes Zilberberg. She will be the one that will help us to make it happen. But, Your Highness, I would like to thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts. As you all could see and testify, we're not just here with someone from the royalty, but also, and first of all, with an intellectual, a person that thinks about his country, the region, and about international affairs in all the senses we could approach in the business area, in economics, and political affairs. So you're very privileged to have this master class, and I would like again to thank you so much for your time on behalf of our president, who is here with us, and our faculty members that are also with us. Once again, I would like to thank the Embassy of Brazil in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which is live following us right now in the person of Ambassador Ari Quintanilla. Thank you so much, and I give you the chance to say your last words today. Thank you.
I just want to echo your thanks, especially to Ambassador Ari Quintanilla, who's done a lot of work to facilitate this visit. And my visit really has come at the right time with all of these developments happening in the bilateral relationship. And I hope to ensure that FAAP is one of the key planks moving forward in that relationship as well. Thank you.
So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your very good questions. We are very, I would say, privileged to have you as students as well. And I'm very happy that we could have this productive morning. So have good classes during your next days. And for Your Highness, we have prepared a lunch where you're going to be welcome to be with us again.
Thank you. Can I present a gift to the President?
Yeah, sure.
Please,
It's our pleasure. He wants to take a picture with everyone. So, you see? Yeah, maybe you can go downstairs. Yeah, sure. You see, you're gonna be very, very important right now. So smile for a big picture. Maybe, Your Highness, you can be right in the center here, and we can have.